Hi, everyone. I'm Darshan Karwat, an assistant professor in the School for the Future of Innovation and Society and the Polytechnic School at Arizona State University. And it's so great to see how so many of you have logged in to the inaugural Constellation Prize award ceremony. On behalf of the entire prize committee, I send my best wishes out to all of you and hope things are as well as they can be given the current circumstances. Engineering is an expression of human values. It can be conducted in ways that enrich, fulfill, and demonstrate the highest potential of human endeavor. It has become more and more evident that in order to deal with the most pressing issues of our time, from war and conflict to the climate crisis and caring more deeply about the natural world, we need to engineer differently. Given how important technological systems are to the human condition and our impact on the earth, we need to engineer for different purposes because a just, verdant, and peaceful world needs to be built. Over the last few years, my colleagues and I have recognized the need to bring to light the generative work being done by engineers and their collaborators who are pushing the boundaries of engineering in new ways. We feel strongly that it is important to recognize those individuals and collaborations that are infusing their work with greater attention to peace, social justice, and respect for our fragile environment, such that they may inspire others, from students to retired professionals, to new heights in centering ideas of environmental protection, social justice, human rights, and peace in engineering. The Constellation Prize is an attempt to do just that. We want to shed a light on how engineering can be done to promote new modes of engagement, research, development, and design that elevate these values and ideas. It recognizes both engineers and thoughtful collaborators between engineers and collaborations between engineers and individuals, communities, and organizations. In totality, we seek to create a constellation of people and efforts that can help reimagine what engineering is for. Today, we begin. I want to start off by introducing the wonderful team I've had the pleasure of working with in putting all of this together. Jerry McCann, a peace engineer with BuildUp, a nonprofit working to combine peace building practices, participatory methods, and digital technologies to identify and address emerging challenges to peace. Mira Olson, a professor of civil and environmental engineering at Drexel University and co-creator of the peace engineering program there. Katrina Thomas, a PhD student in engineering education at Arizona State University. Dan Lander, a lecturer in civil and environmental engineering at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And Brendan Costello-Kuhn, a lecturer in science and technology studies at RPI as well. Now, just a few words on how we selected our inaugural winners. We started by looking at whether the nominees' initiative was based in the United States. While we appreciate the important work that US engineers and their collaborators are doing around the world, our motivation this year was to pay more attention to the work that is being done in our backyards. All of these engineering-focused initiatives were then rated on whether they were generative, community-driven, boundary-pushing in their discipline, inspiring to others, collaborative, promoting the ideals that we want to with the prize, as well as having some sustained impact in the world. And we were so excited to see how many of the nominees were doing work driven by these very criteria. You can find more details on these criteria by going to our website, constellationprize.org. So with that, it's time to recognize our winners across 4 areas of work: engineering education, policy impact, Indigenous rights and biodiversity, and community collaboration. Mira, you're up.
Great. Thank you. And hi, everyone. It's so exciting to be here together and to get to share all of this inspiring work. I am delighted to award Khalid Qadir the 2020 Constellation Prize for Engineering Education. Khalid was nominated by a former student of his, most notably for challenging and transforming the way engineering students think, and I quote this, with an infectious positivity and energy. In his popular courses, Engineering, Environment, and Society, Engineering, Social Justice, among many others, Khalid teaches engineering students how to approach and engage humbly with local community partners on environmental justice issues. He encourages students, and in fact all of us, to think about the power dynamics inherent in engineering practice, the ways in which engineering can inadvertently deepen the inequalities and environmental degradation, and then provides us with the motivation and the critical skills to do better. We applaud his ability to think across disciplines and to instill in students an understanding of how the work they do is embedded in society and indeed in people's lives. So Khalid, welcome. Please share with us how you came to this work and what inspires you to do what you do.
Thank you so much. I came to this work on the shoulders of other giants, and I want to say some thank yous to those who have helped me come to this work and help make it what it is. First and foremost, to the organizers of this really special prize and those who nominated and supported me. This is a really unique thing that you're doing, and listening to the words that Darshan shared at the beginning, it's incredibly powerful to think about sort of what space you're trying to create and what kind of work you're trying to honor. I feel really special for being in the company of those who are here. In particular, Dean, I see you. I appreciate you so much, and I'm so excited for you and your future students. I also want to share that this is never work that we do alone. We know that. My co-teachers, Laura, Anna, Reagan, Sasha, Jess, Rule, Ashton, Summer, Scott, Soliva, Emma, Sean, and Kendall. All of you have co-taught with me in these courses, and you're just as much a part of this, and you know that. You've inspired me, taught me so much. Your partnership has been incredible, and our students love and respect you for good reason, as you've done so much and you continue to. Community partners, grateful for your willingness to work with me. This work wouldn't happen without the communities that are willing to open their doors, open their homes, open their hearts to our students and to the university. And they subsidize the university by doing so. And I'm inspired constantly by the fierce commitment of our partners and the incredible work that they do that is so inspiring to all of us. In reality, those community partners are the driver of mine and my students' education. My students, you're incredible. The past few semesters in particular, I can't believe we're doing all of this online in a pandemic. It's pretty amazing, and I'm constantly impressed by the ways you show up for class, and more importantly, the ways you show up for one another. On so many levels, what we're trying to do is both the topics we're studying and the pedagogical approach. It's not like other engineering courses, and sometimes it's felt really isolating, but you've rolled with it. Your patience and trust have been so inspiring. And finally, that this work is really sort of part of a longer trajectory of work that started far before me. We know that, and I want to just say thanks to the uncountable activists and social justice advocates who have forced these issues onto the table, who won't let us get away with engineering as usual, and who are forcing us to do better. This award is among the fruits of their work that they've been doing long before I showed up in the scene, and I'm grateful to stand on those shoulders. Thank you.
All right, thanks for that. I'm Brandon Costello-Kuhn. I'm a lecturer in the Science and Technology Studies Department at Rensselaer, and it's my pleasure to introduce Keith Hsu and Jay Egg's work with the Sheridan Hollow Alliance for Renewable Energy. Yeah, there we go, that's the slide. So this project illustrates how targeted interventions can have powerful rippling effects at multiple scales. Some of their work has been highly technical, providing detailed critiques of would-be plans for new fossil fuel infrastructure. And to get this information to the people that needed to hear it, they joined forces with community organizers and activists, especially with the inspiring environmental justice leaders in SHARE. Crucially, beyond their critiques of truly bad ideas, they offered compelling alternatives, which you'll hear more about in a minute. They've been able to help protect the health of community members that have borne the brunt of toxic infrastructure in Albany for many decades. But they also are indirectly helping protect water supplies in neighboring regions where the fracked gas would have come from. They're also benefiting many communities impacted by pipeline infrastructure crisscrossing our landscapes. And I would argue that this incredible story of a local win is also a story of global impact, helping address climate change and showing how we can act right now instead of sinking our collective resources and energy into outdated infrastructure that would have grossly negative impacts for decades to come. Jay and Keith, thank you so much for your work and congratulations on your award.
Well, thank you very much, Brandon, and thank you for nominating us, and thank you to everyone else. Keith and I agreed that I would go first, so he can follow up and clean up my mess. So I just want to say, this is how we came into this. I've done a lot of work in New York for about the past decade. When I got word of this, the first few thoughts I had went back to 4 years ago when Bill Nowak, who's the executive director of New York Geo, he talked to me about the concerns with the Empire State Plaza and Sheridan Hollow. I basically told him, I don't know what I can do about this because I don't have enough information. And he put me in touch with Keith Shue. And after Keith unloaded some information on me, and I met with Merton Simpson, the Albany County legislator, I realized irreversibly that the Empire State Plaza could indeed make a better choice than a combined heat and power system. So they could choose to use electrically driven chillers rather than high energy steam driven chillers, which they've been using since 1970, significantly reducing emissions. But, and this is important, it was my wife, Christy Egg, a public health professional, who overheard me in a conversation with Merton and Keith on the phone and was totally taken by the injustice at Sheridan Hollow. Her motivation toward environmental justice redoubled our collective efforts. In summary, I'm honored to be part of this. I don't feel that I deserve it, but the credit indeed goes to many others that just drug me along. So thank you.
So I think I would add that, well, first of all, following up on what Jay said, I want to thank the many members of SHARE, the Sheridan Hollow Alliance for Renewable Energy, for their essential role in making our efforts in Albany successful. I've learned that real change requires really two things that are equally important. First of all, you need to know what you're talking about. You have to have your facts correct and understand what potential solutions look like. But then you also need advocacy. You need people, sometimes the whole chorus of people who demand that change occurs. Either one but not the other won't be enough. You have to have both. You might have the best ideas in the world, but if you're unable to communicate those ideas to policymakers who are motivated to listen, then the status quo is going to prevail. Likewise, 1 million people can march in the street and make demands. But if those demands are not grounded in what's possible in science and in engineering, meaning the science of making things work, then you're not going to make progress either. When it comes to tackling climate change, the fossil fuel industry has little reason to fear things that are impossible happening. What threatens the status quo is the discipline of informed advocacy for solutions that can actually be implemented. So I believe that was the key to our success in reducing pollution within the environmental justice community of Sheridan Hollow. And so my gratitude goes to Jay, to Merton Simpson, and to everyone in SHARE who contributed to our effort. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Keith and Jay, for your words. My name is Katrina Thomas. I am a graduate student at Arizona State University in the Engineering Education Systems and Design program. I would like to present the winners for the Constellation Prize for Biodiversity and Indigenous Rights for their work with the Wilderness Society and the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. They are Lois Epstein and Carlin Itchak. In response to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, which opened the 1.56 million acre Arctic National Wildlife Refuge coastal plain to oil and gas development, Epstein, who serves as the Wilderness Society Program Director, collaborated with industry colleagues familiar with the North Slope oil development to create a map showing the likely extent of development under the law. Itchak, who serves as the Alaska State Director for the Wilderness Society, says the oil development would negatively impact the ecosystem of the porcupine caribou herd, which the Gwinnett people depend on for their way of life. I would like to give Lois and Carlin the opportunity to speak on their work, and congratulations on the prize.
Thank you, Katrina. On behalf of the Wilderness Society, Carlin and I are honored to receive the Constellation Prize And also congratulations to the other prize winners. Since our organization's beginnings in the 1930s, the Wilderness Society has worked to prevent oil and gas development in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, both to ensure continued subsistence resources for Indigenous communities and to protect this world-class Arctic landscape that extends beyond the refuge's boundaries into northwestern Canada. Our engineering project helped us show journalists, legislators, and the public that, contrary to the impression given by some elected officials in DC, oil development could sprawl throughout the 1.56 million acre refuge coastal plain, despite the legal limit of 2,000 acres for the development, quote unquote, footprint. Protecting the coastal plain is essential because it provides calving and post-calving habitat for the porcupine caribou herd, as we just heard, and which contains more than 200,000 animals and supports the Gwich'in people's subsistence way of life. The Wilderness Society is one of the few environmental organizations to have an engineer on staff. We hope this award encourages other public interest organizations to consider how engineers might help advance their work. For example, as climate change continues, there will be an ongoing need to design infrastructure that reduces climate impacts and is resilient in the face of changing weather patterns, such as the extreme weather event that occurred in Texas last week. The private sector likely will not make these changes without prodding from both non-governmental organizations and government. We applaud the Constellation Prize team for recognizing the need for alternative career paths for young engineers interested in using their skills to promote positive social change. My colleague Carlin, who is Inupiaq and has a Juris Doctorate and a background in Alaska Native Studies and Political Science, i.e. non-technical fields, is a model supervisor for Alaska office's technical and scientific staff. He ably oversees our work, including ensuring that it is both understandable to the public and value added for the Indigenous residents of Arctic Alaska. Moreover, he recognizes and supports our need for outside technical and scientific collaborators and peer reviewers. Carlin and I thank the Wilderness Society staff, especially our cartographer, Marty Schnur, and our members and supporters. We also thank the 444S and Wilberforce Foundations, who have been generous funders of our Alaska team's work, engineer Steve Gerlich, and all those involved with bringing the Constellation Prize to fruition.
Thank you, Colin and Lois, and congratulations. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel Lander, and I'm a lecturer in civil and environmental engineering at Rensselaer Polytechnic in upstate New York. So I'm delighted to award the Create Lab at Carnegie Mellon University and the Allegheny County Clean Air Now, or ACAN, which is a grassroots organization fighting for environmental justice, the 2020 Constellation Prize for Community Collaborations. They're celebrated for their creative and impactful partnership that resulted in the closure of a highly polluting industrial facility in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, near Pittsburgh. The team developed a collaborative, what was called the Shenango channel, which was a web-based system used to publish and visualize air pollution measurements, smell complaints, and videos of fugitive emissions released from the Shenango Coke Works. The team was nominated by Professor Gwen Ottinger, who noted that their collaboration exemplifies, and this is a quote, successful collaboration between engineers and a frontline community and shows how thoughtful co-design technology can empower citizens to advocate for social change. The organizing committee was greatly moved by the reciprocity between the Create Lab and ACAN. The respect and reverence that each team demonstrated for the skills of the other brought was palpable at the core of meeting their objectives. We'll hear from two members of ACAN and one of Create Lab in a moment, but before that, I'd like to just acknowledge the full team. We have Randy Sargent, a professor of robotics and the visualization director of the Create Lab, Anna Hoffman, the project director of air quality engagement at Create Lab, Yen-Cha Su is a postdoctoral fellow of the Create Lab, Karen Grzywiński, President and Board Officer of ACAN, and Angelo Taranto, Secretary and Treasurer and Board Officer at ACAN. So let's hear from the recipients. We'll hear from Karen and Randy first.
Hi, thank you. Allegheny County Clean Air Now is honored to accept the Constellation Prize for community collaboration. ACAN formed in about 2014 in protest to pollution from the Shenango Coke Works. It was right outside of Pittsburgh and impacting our communities greatly for decades. After all the frustration and complaints with the odors, pollution, and damage to our health kept escalating, the inaction of our regulators just went on. When ACAN formed, we were supported by many other environmental groups with their ideas, expertise, and also financially. We thank the Breathe Project, Clean Air Council, Clean Water Action, and the Group Against Smog and Pollution for their support. But of course, it was the CREATE Lab that made all the difference by empowering ACAN with the technology to provide 24/7 evidence of the Coke plant's harm to our neighborhood and residents. We're especially grateful to Randy Sargent, who first proposed video monitoring of the plant. Paul Dill and B. Diaz, who tirelessly refined the camera program. Jessica Pachuta, who taught ACAN how to tell our individual stories of the impact of pollution on our lives. And Yen Cha Shu, who created a montage of Shenango's most spectacular pollution events for us to present at a public meeting that was attended by environmental regulators and Shenango management, in addition to over 100 residents. At this meeting, there was no place to hide. The plant shut down about 2 months later. I congratulate and thank all our ACAN members, especially Leah and Dawn Andrasik, who actually hosted the ACAN camera in their attic window. They had the perfect view of Shenango's pollution. We thank you so much for this award, and we thank the CREATE Lab for the privilege of continued collaboration. Randy?
Thanks, Karen. CREATE Lab is so very grateful to you and to Angela and Leah and Don and Kathleen and Thaddeus and everyone else in Allegheny County Clean Air Now for the privilege of collaborating to document and communicate evidence of Shenango's outsized pollution emissions. At every step of the process, you already knew the answers. You and the other residents knew the pungent emissions were coming from Shenango, but the regulators would come days after the event asking a resident with 20 years lived experience whether she could have been confused about where an emission came from. Residents knew Shenango's emissions were causing health problems, but our county's health department published a response claiming no evidence of a connection. But through the cameras that we set up together, we clearly communicated Shenango as the source of the emissions. And when confronted with this evidence, EPA and the county's health department publicly discussed reopening the consent decree under which Shenango is allowed to exceed its permitted emissions, leading to the announcement of the shutdown, Karen, that you mentioned. And with that shutdown, we had a new opportunity to document that once again, you, the residents, were right. In the year following Shenango's shutdown, ER visits, emergency room visits for asthma and COPD dropped 38%. Cardiovascular emergencies dropped 27%. And an pediatric asthma study underway in a local school showed a 25% reduction in physician diagnosed asthma in the kids after shutdown. The residents were right and the county health experts were wrong. On behalf of the team at CREATE Lab, we're grateful and humbled by this award. We'd like to acknowledge Heinz Endowments, Breathe Project, and all the organizations, Karen, that you mentioned for support and partnership, which enabled us to work with you.
So in addition to the inaugural recipients, the Constellation Prize was also like to acknowledge 4 other impressive nominations. In particular, Cameron Casper and Sam Berrigan, founders of Ecoform as rising stars in entrepreneurship, Anthony Dente of Verdant Structural Engineering for Sustainable Engineering Practice, the Morton Center in Global Engineering for Policymaking, Dr. Dan Arthur of Missouri University of Science and Technology for his work on food security. Now I'll pass it over to Mira to get the Q&A started with our inaugural recipients.
Thank you all. Really part of the joy of this process has been getting to learn more about all of this amazing work and all of these people. I encourage you to check out the Constellation Prize website to get to know these people as well. So we will now continue with the Q&A session for our panel of awardees, since we don't think we'll get through everything. We also invite you to an open conversation with all of the awardees and attendees after the ceremony. We'll send a separate link for that as we wrap up. So beginning with Khalid, I think we can all agree that it's important for students to consider different voices. Your students are certainly lucky to hear yours. How do we bring more voices into the engineering classroom, or perhaps re-envision what and where the classroom is?
I struggle with that question every day that I teach. How do we make space? How do we be more inclusive? How do we change the center of our attention? And let me maybe go backwards a little bit, because I think context is important here, and then I'll try to look forward. And the discipline of engineering traces its origins back to the military. Later, engineering came to serve Western industry as well. So our discipline is historically wrapped up in attempts to dominate over others, often through the expansion of Western ideologies of progress. Simply put, as a profession, historically, engineering was constructed to serve the dominant groups in society and to build upon their dominance. It's no surprise then that a lot of our research and our classrooms have been dominated by those influences, and that our work as practicing engineers has disproportionately benefited those groups. However, just because it started that way doesn't mean it needs to end that way. So how might we re-envision our classrooms, and in the process re-envision engineering? I think it begins with recentering our classrooms around those communities that we're trying to benefit. When we center our classrooms around the auto industry, I went to University of Michigan, the auto industry benefits. When we center our classrooms around the military benefits, because we do good work and it benefits those who we focus on. Moving forward, I think we need to center our classrooms around the communities that surround our schools and our colleges, and in particular, the most marginalized communities. Might we focus engineering education around the priorities and struggles of marginalized peoples? If we're brave enough to do so, I believe that we might be able to transform our educational programs into direct sources of public benefit, into sources of social justice in society, and into sources of liberation for others and for ourselves. Part of this process will require moving from solving these really tightly bound, universalized, abstract, discrete problems to embracing complexity and to situating our work within communities, geographies, and times. That's a little wonky, I realize that. So how about for a starting point, let's transform our design courses to focus on real problems, problems that are born out of history and that are situated in specific contexts, problems that require us to engage with both the social and the political, in addition to the technical. Next, let's change the rest of our curriculum to prepare our students to engage with these real issues that they will encounter in our new design courses. Ultimately, what I'm really suggesting here is that we redefine engineering as a people and community-based enterprise, as opposed to a technical-based one. In doing so, I'm arguing that we should center our work on communities of people, their voices, their concerns, and their priorities. Even more, I'm arguing that we should turn their communities into our classrooms and decenter our universities, ourselves, and our technical expertise, and instead invite those communities that we are seeking to benefit to be our teachers, our mentors, and our guides.
Well, that's kind of a perfect segue. Thank you so much for those words. So kind of running with that idea of kind of reorienting engineering more and more towards a people-oriented and community-oriented endeavor. Keith and Jay, you both spoke about how important and crucial and necessary the connection with SHARE was with Merton Simpson and all these other amazing environmental justice leaders and elected officials. And so I guess I invited all of my students to this event, and I hope at least one of them came. So for students and really anyone that wants to reorient their their career and their work more towards community engagement. I'm wondering what advice you have. And I know that you both have spoken about, your career has had all these twists and turns, and I often bring people to my classes to talk about the careers, and it's often very meandering and a lot of unexpected things. And so I've given the urgency of climate change and climate justice and these other just huge issues. Do you have any advice for kind of accelerating that process? How could young engineers connect with communities earlier and do the kind of meaningful work that all of the awardees exemplify today?
Thank you, Brandon. I'll go first, but I have to segue, and I just want to say to the Constellation team, thank you for these amazing plaques that you made for us that are personalized. They're just so beautiful, and I didn't want to let the opportunity get away to thank you for that. Ours says Keith, Shu, and J.A. 2020 Prize, Constellation Prize winners for policy change. So thank you for that. That means a lot. And I will prize this always. I think my wife likes it even more than I do, if that's possible. To answer your question, Brandon, I have to go back a little bit to what Khalid was saying. The learning laboratory is everything. And I write a lot of curriculum. And I found that when the curriculum involves actually doing a project, it makes a difference. And so you need to be you need to have your hands on, and it makes a huge difference. I wish I could talk for an hour about that. But what I do want to say is that I find that pro bono work is the most rewarding of activities. My recommendation to students is to always have something going on that's benefiting the community, your brothers and sisters all around you. I believe that mankind's greatest joy comes from bestowing gifts and service upon others. It changes people. It has become the measure by which I have found joy. I highly recommend it as a matter of course to any students as they pursue their education and careers. It will naturally follow them into their everyday lives for decades to come, and they will find that extracurricular pro bono work is what makes their career.
Well, I'd like to say, first of all, I completely agree with what Jay said. I think the motivation comes from pro bono work, knowing that you're helping people. And actually my advice on that is something that I think I would say to my younger self as well. When I graduated from college, many of my peers, they found lucrative jobs with government contracting companies, and some of those were developing weapon systems and designing things that I think most of us pray would never actually get used. I didn't want to do that. I was wanting to work on something that I could be happy with seeing when we turn the switch on. So I was trying to steer clear of that. And so what I ended up doing though is I took a job as a hardware design engineer in an industry that I felt would be relatively benign, telecommunications. And so I did that for several years until my environmental pursuits kind of pulled me in a different direction. But in hindsight, I would say, don't do that. I would say, seek out opportunities from the get-go where you can make a positive, a tangible difference in the world. Instead of just looking for something that does less harm, see how you can help. You know, when it comes to environmental justice, learn how other people live, learn what their needs are. And, you know, I think the Peace Corps is an opportunity for that, frankly. They're looking for engineers, and that's a way of perhaps, I would say to a young person, as a way of exploring what opportunities are out there and get ideas of things that you might want to get into. And I would also say to run with your ideas. If you can't find a fulfilling job, then create one. I think that is actually, the potential for that is actually greater now today than it's ever been. In fact, I'm gonna give you an example. There are several startup companies founded by progressive young people looking, believe it or not, into advanced nuclear technology to tackle climate change, to end world poverty, to bring energy to the world, to eliminate fossil fuel pollution that actually impacts environmental justice communities the most. And in fact, a lot of that's being driven by women, but Energy Collective is an example of that if you want to look them up. But finally, I would say wherever possible, look for opportunities in which you can actually do something, where you're doing something, inventing something, designing something, building something that makes a positive difference. Sometimes I think the problem with the work of what a lot of environmental NGOs tend to do when it comes to energy is that they tend to kind of get boxed into a corner where they're spinning their wheels on coming up with theoretical position papers. And sometimes those position papers they decide on what they want the solution to be before understanding the problem. And so when that happens, you become disconnected from the world, and we don't make progress that way. You know, by definition, I think engineering is applied science. And I believe there's an inherent desire by engineers to create. So I would say to look for ways to do that. I think that's what's most rewarding. I think that's where that's why we had some success in Sheridan Hollow. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Keith and Jay, for your insight. That's really awesome to hear. So continue on with kind of the theme of community. For Lois and Carlin, what recommendations do you have for engineers when collaborating with Indigenous people for environmental protection advocacy?
Thank you, Katrina. I'll take that. My name is Carlin Itchak. My Inupiaq name is Nagayak Itchuakak. And I want to thank the folks with the Constellation Prize for this great honor, and thank Lois for all the hard work that you do. I kind of feel like Jay, like I've been dragged into this and I'm not worthy of this. But Darshan talked about earlier about building a constellation or connectedness of engineers and collaborators. And there's one constellation that connects us all, whether we like it or not, and that's the Indigenous people of this land. And all of us on this call are connected. We're on or near the unceded territory of the Indigenous people. And so there's no excuse really for engineers to not reach out to Indigenous people to collaborate. I hear our friends in the tri-state area, Rensselaer, Troy, Albany. I spent a lot of time with folks on the Mohawk, Seneca, Oneida nations, and all of us on this call have an opportunity to reach out and work with the Indigenous people. And I'm on the unceded territory here in Anchorage, Alaska, of the Dena'ina people, and I'm very grateful for this recognition. But collaborating with Indigenous partners requires engineers who are open to learning new forms of knowledge, understanding Indigenous cultural values, and utilizing different ways of communication. Engineer collaborators may also need to unlearn some of what you've learned or have been taught in the dominant culture-based schooling. In the conservation arena specifically, the goal should be Indigenous-led stewardship of lands and water. Try to take the time to learn about the different Indigenous worldviews. Sometimes they're a lot different than our Western culture views. And so Indigenous people have been stewards of the land and water since time immemorial, and this is not lost or new to any of you. But coming to that recognition that Indigenous people possess what we call traditional Indigenous knowledge, sometimes you've heard it called traditional ecological knowledge of the environment that has been passed down from generation to generation, and proves invaluable for scientists and others with the humility and wisdom to stop and listen. So sometimes when we go into rural communities where Indigenous people live, we want to go in and teach them something, but we should stop and pause and realize that we also have something to learn from the Indigenous people who've stewarded this land and protected the environment and the wildlife and the ecosystems and the biodiversity since time immemorial. Indigenous people in their own right are scientists and engineers and archaeologists and protectors of this fragile ecosystem. So striving to implement the cultural values of Indigenous partners, such as cooperation over conflict, is another key to collaborative success. And communications with Indigenous people is stylistically different, It's critical to always be respectful, to listen carefully and patiently, and to not dominate conversations, and to ensure that meetings between and with elders, that the elders are able to provide a prayer or a land acknowledgement. And additionally, it's essential to spend time in the region of concern to become more knowledgeable of its characteristics and to acquire firsthand place-based knowledge from the region's indigenous residents. Last, I would say that engineers working with indigenous populations also need to understand this, that you must be ready to unlearn what you've been taught about indigenous history, colonization, and the legal systems that govern indigenous lands today, because colonialization has resulted in impacts to indigenous peoples alive today. Non-indigenous collaborators should strive to understand Native partners' perspectives, and training by indigenous educators to help unlearn dominant culture teachings is key, especially being mindful that many indigenous people, like myself, that have experienced, our ancestors that have experienced years of assimilation and termination policies, that there's a historical trauma that we're going through. So be mindful of that, but also know that you have a lot to offer and that you shouldn't be afraid to reach out and collaborate with indigenous people. But thanks again for this wonderful recognition, and I want to acknowledge Lois's great work, and Marty Schnur, our cartographer, and Steve Gerlich, our collaborating engineer. So Kuyanak-Pak, thank you.
Thank you, Colin, for those wise words. Returning to our final inaugural recipients, the Shenango project collaboration between Create Lab and ACAN. I wanted to ask, what we were so inspired by was the ways that engineers are collaborating with environmental justice organizations, and the ways that you seem to honor and hold up what each of you brought to the table. And so we're wondering about what was it about this collaboration that allowed you to reach the outcome that you were seeking? And was there something unique about the collaborative approach that was taken? And Angelo, perhaps you first.
Okay, I'll start first. First, I'd like to thank the Constellation Prize Committee for this honor. And we're very honored to be among this wonderful group of awardees. So what led to the outcome we were seeking? I think it was a combination of outrage, passion, compassionate engineers, and a great working relationship. ACAN is a group of residents who are outraged by the pollution released into the air that we and our families were breathing. We were also outraged by the inability of regulators to do anything to stop or reduce the pollution. We were willing to engage with the regulators, elected officials, and the owner of the Shenango Coke Works, and we engaged with all of them. However, we didn't know how to amplify our message in a way that would force all of them to realize that the situation really was unsustainable. Our partners at the Create Lab compassionately understood our desperate situation, and they used their talent and resources to help us amplify our message. The development of the Shenango channel by the Create Lab, along with the detection method developed by Yencha Shu to determine the worst pollution events, provided the amplification that we needed. The results were beyond our greatest expectations. Perhaps the unique part of the collaboration was that the Create Lab and ACAN recognized that we had the perfect partnership of talent and expertise and grassroots passion. And we thank the Create Lab for bringing us to the point where we were able to accomplish our goal. Thank you, Rand.
Thank you, Angelo. I really agree with everything you said. Working with you to co-create Shenango Channel and work together to document Shenango's emissions has been one of the most rewarding activities I've experienced. I want to observe also a cultural barrier, which is that we at universities are often guilty of talking more than we listen. And to Keith's point earlier, we sometimes decide what to work on first and might only later engage around applications. And sometimes we try and turn everything into a nail for a new hammer. Angelo and Karen, in the course of our partnership, I'm grateful for what you taught us. You taught us to listen. ACAN members with a lived experience already knew what was going on, and our collaboration wasn't about discovering something brand new, but rather collecting and presenting evidence in a form to engage both public and policymakers so that residents couldn't be ignored anymore. We learned that community must set the agenda and set the priorities. Y'all were phenomenally effective at engaging the public and regulators. And when you convene the big community meeting with over 100 residents and regulators and the head of air protection from EPA Region 3, and we worked together to bring that visual evidence, aimed for the public, aimed for policymakers. What we didn't do is we didn't create academic charts and we didn't wait for the next publication cycle. But you taught us what we needed to know to be good partners. And the thing that we had to remember on our side was to always listen.
Wow, what a remarkable demonstration of engineering reimagined. A beautiful constellation to launch us on our way. Hi, I'm Jerry McCann, an engineer who became a peace builder and now refer to myself as a peace engineer with Build Up. And I just want to thank all those out there who brought this amazing work of these engineers and collaborators to our attention. For those who know me, I've been on a global quest to find precisely these kinds of engineers. And I think that they've affirmed what we in the Constellation Prize team believed from the start. Our hypothesis were they were out there and we needed to find them. We were truly inspired by the Constellation Prize recipients and all of the nominees that were brought forth. The Constellation Prize team is eager to learn more from our award winners and from other nominees as we move into the second year of this important celebration of reimagining engineering. So keep an eye out on our website and social media channels as we share in our learnings and broaden our networks of collaboration. We have a lot of ideas. We're a small team. Now we're a larger constellation with our first group of recipients and nominees. And so we're excited to expand this in the coming year. But we also need your help. Please keep your eyes out for other special engineers who are looking beyond the equations and their technical applications towards solutions that will help to heal our ailing environment, address our social injustices, and build peace where there is violent conflict. If you discover one, please nominate her or him. We will start accepting nominees in the fall of this year. Before we close, we want to thank two very special people. Sophie Standing, our wonderful graphic artist, who has inspired us with the beautiful images that adorn our website, are part of our background, and also were the designs for our award certificates that Jay shared. Thanks, Jay, for spotlighting that. So Sophie Standing, thank you for that beautiful work. And also Melissa Waite, our webinar technical support, who swooped in to rescue a bunch of amateurs, giving us the confidence that we could pull this webinar ceremony off. Thanks again to our prize recipients and all of those who participated in this first annual recognition of engineers who choose to reimagine the field. Thank you all for coming. For those who want to remain and share your thoughts or ask questions of our award winners, please join us at the link on the screen and in the chat. And thanks again.